Good evening. What an afternoon, eh? It does feel good to be here with everyone in the sanctuary at St. Andrew's, where we've done events before. And I'll say a few words before we start about the series. So part of the launch was this afternoon. Part of the launch then is the Canadian Architecture and Design lecture series. So we call that Visions in Canadian Design, to include design, but also expansive thinking beyond mere buildings. So people like Bruce Mao will be coming to talk about design in his field. And our first speaker, and I'm most happy that Douglas and Adoya Cardinal have joined us for the opening, as well as the first lecture. That's particularly personally great for us to be here together. So I'm very happy, and I want to thank them on behalf of everybody from Sudbury. If we can welcome the Cardinals to town. So the series starts tonight with Mr. Cardinal, and then in a series of Wednesdays, except for one that's on a Monday, Etienne Gaboret will be speaking next. He's from Winnipeg and a Francophone architect of Métis heritage, was a descendant of Louis Riel. Did great work in Winnipeg, if you know St. Boniface Cathedral, the bridge that goes across the river in Winnipeg, and so on. Then in order, we have a series and a website poster. Then I think it's myself in the order to talk about the vision of the school. And then it's Richard de la Riva, architect, grew up here. People know his family very well. He's had an important presence with his father, who's a doctor, known that many of you know, was on council and so on. And Richard, who I met many years ago at McGill, got settled in Montreal, and he's been in practice with Affleck and de la Riva. So he's returning to talk about his work there, restoration work and housing and others. And then Bruce Mao is speaking. That's the Monday, October. It's the only Monday in October after the next one. I think it's Monday, October 7th, if I'm not mistaken. And October 2nd is Richard de la Riva. And then Ian MacDonald is coming to talk. He's an architect from Toronto, won several design awards. I think his work is exceptional in the relationship between landscape and building. And so he's agreed to come and talk. And then Raymond Moriyama, who we shouldn't forget, of Science North. For those of you that know Sudbury, and if you follow architecture at all, you would know Moriyama's name. And the last time that Douglas and Adoya and I were all together in Saskatoon a few months ago, the riverfront is fantastic in Saskatoon, and of course it wasn't a surprise to find out that Moriyama had done the earlier plan for the wetlands there. So there's definitely an intent and a set of vectors in the inaugural lecture series that has to do with inviting people who are celebrated, and not only celebrated, but celebrated for good reason. So Douglas Cardinal has received many awards, had many honorary doctorates. He's a member of the Order of Canada, which is worth highlighting. But rather than give a litany of his projects, most of you, of course, know the Museum of Civilization that he did years ago, and now in conversation briefly with Adoya, and they're reprogramming the museum as a museum of history. And that in itself, to do a program and then get to look at it 20 years later and redo that, is a design challenge. And I'm sure that in conversation later you could ask Douglas about that. But I was very interested in a little book early on that he wrote called Of the Spirit. And young writing, young, intense writing, 1977. And I've read it a few times in my own career. And there's a passage I wanted to read you that fits with tonight. He was talking about the designing a college, the Grand Prairie College, and he said, the college must be designed for growth. It must be a living organism growing along Bear Creek in harmony with the land and with the people living within it. This growth cannot be an attack on the surrounding area, as many universities are. The educational center cannot exist like a haughty, dominating, inviolate tower. It must serve the individuals of the surrounding community. That's an important point, right? To get out of the ivory tower and actually be part of a kind of organic presence in the city. And another thought, of course, he wrote about the being an Aboriginal architect, an Aboriginal person, thinking about the history of Indigenous peoples. And he wrote, "History records how we were treated as less than men. The immigrant culture found it convenient to treat us as children, which gave it an excuse to control our destiny, denying us the opportunity of controlling our own. The immigrant culture tried to change our philosophy and destroy our spirit and pride by introducing an alien immigrant philosophy and religion that fostered inhumanity and forced on our minds the idea that we were savages in need of salvation. We feel the forces that have polluted our minds and destroyed our initiative and pride. We feel the high cost of this self-righteous culture, bent on having the world for itself, because we see its destructive impact on all life on this land as well as our own. When we hunted and killed for survival, we did not waste. Every part of the creature was used out of respect for the creature that gave up its life for our survival. Our basic philosophy emphasizes the oneness of all living beings. Our reverence for life causes us to be deeply concerned about life and our life givers. Their destruction means the physical and spiritual destruction of ourselves." Two very different passages, but in a real sense, watching Douglas Cardinal's work myself over the past 30 years, he's done fantastic creative work, and I think he'll definitely talk about that tonight, not losing that creative spirit, not losing the intuitive feeling, not tackling each project for its freshness. And he's done projects including the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington that you may know. First Nations work includes the Cultural Institute in Wujibougamu in Quebec, which is a remarkable project. And those are projects we'll be studying in the course. I mean, the curriculum is laid out with a course on Canadian art and architecture, and several of the speakers in the fall term have actually produced bodies of work that we will be studying for the years to come. So while you're still with us and in happy shape and great to be here, I want to welcome warmly Douglas Cardinal.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I enjoy being here in this community and with all the students here. It's really important to think of myself as really a perpetual student, because I'm always, every day you learn something new and wonderful in this profession. And my father was a hunter and trapper and taught me how to hunt and trap. I had a trap line. I worked with him and learned as much as I could about how to live in harmony with nature. He was a member of the Good Striker and First Charger clan of the Blackfoot Nation. And they were the first chargers who would ride into battle with nothing but a coup stick and touch a vulnerable part of the enemy and say, "You're on our territory. But even if you are an enemy or somebody who may do us harm, we put our lives in the line to treat you like our brother. So you better come and talk to us, and we'll sit, and if you need something, we'll share it with you." So the first chargers were the ones who always confronted their adversaries first, but did it in a good way, because they believed that all life was sacred. So that is the teachings of my father. And my mother was, her family was from Germany. And they came and they were homesteaders. And my father and mother, my father, when he met my mother realized that that is the man she wanted to be with, so she moved from her very good position as supervisor of a hospital at 26 and moved to a log cabin in the Porcupine Hills and raised 8 children. So, But she always wanted me to be an architect. And so, so that's, and you never argued with my mother. So she trained me as an architect, and I went to she wanted me to go to a convent, a residential school, which was very difficult. But I think you have to see always the benefits and the positive things. And so they laid the foundation for my whole career. And I studied music and the arts and architecture and sculpture. And so then I went to the University of Texas in Austin. And there I received my degree in architecture. So that is my background. And as a student, that experience was very important because here I describe architecture as my approach to architecture is an organic approach to design. And why I decided to look at architecture differently was that coming from the country, you know, as I did, being in harmony with nature, and then wanting to be an architect and planner, I thought, and just looking and walking in our cities, which are very ugly boxes and invading the environment and the second most machines on the planet that are polluting our buildings. So I saw that our cities were almost like cancerous growths that were invading the natural environment, polluting and destroying with no real empathy or caring about the people in the cities or the environment. So I then questioned everything I saw. And I thought, and that's very important as students, live in the question everything, because we have to create a whole new way of thinking if we're going to live in harmony with nature and harmony on this planet, because we as human beings have created a crisis where we have created global warming just because we have not been in harmony with each other and harmony with our environment. So I see that the younger generation has to clean up the mess that our generation created. And therefore, they have to question everything. And that is why I started questioning everything when I went to school, university. I thought, okay, architecture is supposed to be an art. How come we have created the most ugly, with all the knowledge we have and everything, we have not created so much ugliness? I mean, the Renaissance, the Goths, the Greeks, the Romans, all these people created beautiful works of architecture, the mother of the arts, frozen music, as you see these cathedrals in Europe. And what do? Just walk downtown Toronto, downtown New York, and whatever, you know, and think, what have we done with all this knowledge? And what vast ugliness we've created. So then I questioned. So I thought, okay, when did they stop, I felt, producing beautiful architecture? You know, when did they start stripping architecture from sculpture and painting and producing such ugliness? And I thought, well, okay, they produced architecture up to the Art Nouveau and Art Deco, but after that, it's a disaster. To me, the Bauhaus and modern architecture, you know, and all these boxes and everything, oh my God, you know, that's not architecture. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go and study how to capture the spirit of architecture. So I studied the Renaissance, the work of Borromini, and the dynamic forms of architecture created by the Baroque period. And I studied the architecture of humanism, of the Renaissance, putting people first in the center. And I really delved into the history of architecture and how they planned and built these marvelous structures. And I didn't see anything myself that I could appreciate in the so-called modern movement. Because the buildings are so static and so sterile and so boxy. Like, to me, a box is something, a box is where you put dead people in and bury them 6 feet under. You don't live in boxes. So I thought, well, after studying all these works of architecture, and I felt more influenced by the Baroque period, Borromini, the work of Alvar Aalto, the work of Gaudí and Frank Lloyd Wright. To me, those were architects. And that established more my style. And then I also, when I was a student, I met Lauren Harris, one of the group of 7 artists, who took European art and his training and everything, and was totally inspired by the wonderful and dramatic landscape that we have, and the colors and textures of the land, and his art reflected that. It was not an art that didn't come anywhere except out of the landscape. And so, in talking to him when I was 18 or 19 and just memorized by his work, I thought, why shouldn't I do that in architecture? Why shouldn't I be inspired by the land itself, the dramatic landscape and the colors and textures of the land? Like the Greeks were inspired by their flora and fauna. Like the Greeks were inspired by creating male and female proportions based on, you know, the proportions of human beings, because they, in a sense, had an affinity for the beauty in ourselves and the beauty in their environment. So where did architecture, for me, get off course? And that's why I turned to more organic architecture, that I believe that we have to elevate the human spirit. And so next, and evolving a building from the needs of the people that inhabit the spaces I create. A built environment we create should embrace and respect each individual and emphasize respect and balance with nature. I believe in bringing people's visions into reality. Quantum physics reveals to us that the smallest building blocks of matter have no space-time, and that all electrons are totally connected throughout the universe, and that all matter throughout the universe comes into being by pure intention, creating unlimited possibilities. So we have to start with a vision, and how we bring a vision into reality is by pure intention. It's just like people here had the intention of creating a school of architecture here, but it took a total commitment of people working together to make that happen. We human beings have the unique gift of creative power. See, we have this amazing gift. No other being on this planet can create the way we create. I mean, we can affect the behavior of electrons and the very building blocks of matter by our intentions. So when you think something, when you create, when you think, the universe shifts a bit because it creates the possibility that it can occur. You have to believe that we are magical beings, that we are shamans, because by our pure intention, we can create anything we want, you know? If we want to fly, we create flying machines. Let's fly faster than sound. We create those, you know? Let's go to the moon and back. Let's blow up a city with one bomb. You see, we are very powerful creatures. The first step in creating a work of art is to clearly state our intention. And once you declare your vision as a powerful intention, the universe shifts because you've created the possibility that can occur. Bringing together all the stakeholders of a project and through consensus, developing a vision that speaks to the very core, not only connects the people developing the vision, but it creates a vision to enroll all the people necessary to bring that vision into reality. You know, if you speak from here, from your heart, and you say it in a way that it resonates in other people's hearts, that's how you enroll people. You don't do it from here. You do it from heart to heart, because people of all races, all creeds, all cultures can understand you if you speak from your heart. And it's very important to realize that you have to bring a vision into reality. For me, you state what you're going to do. You make a statement so powerful that people want to be enrolled in that vision. And you don't come across from fear, you come across from commitment. Because once you make a commitment, you can move mountains. It's like Gandhi was this tall. He defeated the whole British Empire because he had this commitment for his people. So we have nothing to fear because we are completely connected to everything and everything in the universe. So if you see yourself as a spiritual being, if you see yourself that life flows through you, flows through all living beings, flows through the trees, the forest, flows through the waters, the mountains, the stones, flows through all of the earth and all the universe. If you see that you're connected to all life and you're connected to the Creator, there is nothing to fear because you're a part of all living beings. You're part of universal knowledge. The knowledge of the universe is limitless compared to the limited knowledge of mankind. True creativity lies not in what you know, but what you don't know you don't even know. You see, if you come from knowing, you block the possibility it can occur. Remember that little line from Avatar when that woman said his head is full, too full? Because if that's the problem sometimes, even in our universities, we can read all those books and everything else, but if you come from knowing, you're stuck exactly where you are. You have to actually You know, the most powerful thing I find is a blank sheet of paper. A blank sheet of paper, and coming from not knowing, has unlimited possibilities. But the minute you come from knowing, you block the possibility of something truly creative. If you have a preconceived idea of how things are, you block the creative possibilities. Next. So it's that blank sheet of paper and creating new paradigms, which we have to create. You young people have to create a whole new world. All the institutions are failing us. And we're a crisis in our environment with our host, the earth. So we have to come up with new possibilities. Now, I believe that a building is a living organism, and that the spaces that people are housed in are almost like cells in that living organism. And our job is to find the genetic code of that organism, like the shape and form and function of that organism. And I believe that a building, in a sense, if you go through this process, the building itself becomes, in a sense, has a soul, because you're pumping your best energy and your emotion and commitment in it. So as you develop each cell and each shape, like this room, for example, housing the people and the way it functions, you develop the shape and form of each cell, and then you find out how each cell relates to each other. So the building actually grows out of actually trying to, in a sense, look at it as an organism. And then here you start putting structural systems like bones, mechanical systems like arteries, electrical like the nervous systems, until we evolve a living organism. And it's like a plant growing on the landscape, but you place that organism on the site, and then the sun, the way an organism grows, it embraces the sun, protects itself from the wind, and it's related to its surroundings and its environment. So you have to look at it like a living organism growing from the inside out and also affected from the outside in. And to me, working back and forth from the inside out and the outside in, you start determining the form and shape of the building. So once you determine this shape, I feel, this sculptural shape, because it has to be art, or it's not architecture. It has to have a real sense of sculpture in the landscape. But also it should have a message. It should say what it is. And like this is an example of a project for a Native community. And I wanted the shape of the building to be like a dancer. And so it was a combination that you have to have, what is the author's message? Like in any sculpture, you want, the sculpture should say something. It should speak to you. Architecture should speak to you. If it's so blah that you can't get anything out of it when you walk up to it, it's not architecture. So for me, anyway. And the soft landscaping form should flow into the hard landscaping we design. So I look at a building as hard landscaping because it should flow with the landscaping. It should be part of the landscaping. So I believe if architecture is created with respect for the people and the environment, it can then raise the spirits of all those who are involved, as well as all those who enter its spaces. So that's what I feel. I feel that architecture, in a sense, isn't just a profession. It's a bloody mission, given where we're coming from. And I had the opportunity. I had this client, Father Vern Merckx. He said, I want you to design a Catholic church, past, present, and future. And I want it to say to me, I'm a Catholic church without a crucifix or a cross on it. So I want you to embody the church in a sculptural form. I want it to speak to me. I want it to be designed around the new liturgy from Pope John, who opened the church up to a new concept, new ideas. And in the beginning, it was difficult for me because I grew up in a convent and I had issues. Big issues. But the important thing is forgiveness. The important thing of how you move on in life is to see the best in what circumstances you're in and forgive. Because when you forgive, you open your heart for love. And what I wanted to do with the church is to give an act of love to the church. Maybe I didn't get so much love in that residential school, but it was important to give it back. So for me, that church was very important. And yes, I think it still is my best work because, I had to deal with a lot of issues when I was putting it together. But I had challenges because the roof had 81,000 simultaneous equations that had to close. And try X, Y, and Z, okay? The three unknowns, try 81,000. It would take 7 in 100 years just to work out the calculations. So I had to find a computer. But you see, once you declare something, I found that the right people showed up. I got Swiss Cables, I got Dr. Alfred Parm, who was head of the Portland Cement Association, and I had a bunch of mathematicians. I found a computer in Chicago. It was like floors and floors of tubes. They didn't have chips back then. It was all tubes. And we solved the problem. Actually, I remember, and I keep saying this, that because it was so funny at the time, Father Merckx said to me, you're building the walls and you haven't even solved the roof. And how am I going to tell the congregation the problems that we're in? And I said, Father, you have to have faith. It's a spiritual act. Because everything really is a spiritual act when it comes down to it. Because I thought after doing the church, why are we just doing buildings that have a spiritual base for Sunday? Why not every day? Like, why not run one's whole life by having spiritual spaces? It's, to me, important that we do that in every building. Why shouldn't every building be a spiritual act of love and caring for people? That is, to me, extremely important. We lack in our society love for each other, or we wouldn't be so damn disconnected. Our cities, our buildings disconnect us from each other. In our city centers, we might not even know our neighbors in North America. It's different in Europe. And my wife's hometown is 14th century village. There's a square, Everybody is connected in that town with that square. Everybody lives together. Everybody. When I bring my children there, everybody looks after them. You know, it's like one big family. Unfortunately, you know, it was designed in the 14th, 15th century. But our modern cities are not like that. We don't even know our neighbors next door because there's no space, no opportunity to connect with each other. Because we forgot the most important ingredient of all, and that is love and caring for each other. And love and caring for our environment. So that is something that in this college I had the opportunity of designing this college with the students. Like, who asks the students how to design a classroom? Or a teacher? Or a doctor how to design an operating room? How about the head surgical nurse? I bet she knows more. You know, we don't talk to the user enough. We don't talk to the very people that we're supposed to be serving as architects. You know, that's a problem. All of our planning is top down instead of bottom up. Our planning should be bottom up. This is supposed to be a democracy. It's supposed to serve the people. But governments, institutions serve themselves, and people are fodder to the institutions. How about exercising the opportunity we have as architects to actually serve the people themselves? Bottoms-up planning. When we planned with the students, the teachers, and then the community, then we turned to government with all their rules, regulations, and how to do this and how to do that and whatever. They were all obsolete. I found there was a 22-year lag time between what is given to architects for standards of schools and colleges and everything and what is implemented. That's a whole generation. That's a waste. Why not actually go with the people that are doing it? And then you're serving governments more because you can show them, oh, you better change this, you better change that rule, you better change this rule. Maybe you should throw out that whole book and write a new book. Because your book, which is, and they say, well, it's in the book. I mean, my whole job is here to look after the book and turn to page 22 dash such and such, you're supposed to do it this way. Hey, your book is obsolete. But, you know, and let's do it this way. Let's make your book more relevant by changing it this way. You're serving government. You're serving the whole bureaucracy. You're serving the institutions if you design from the bottom up. And it was nice this year. We received an award from the profession for influencing that community in a good way. And my team was very happy about that. This town, for example, is outside of Edmonton. And Edmonton said to St. Albert, you're a dormitory of Edmonton. We're going to take over your community, and you'll be a subdivision of Edmonton. St. Albert says, hold on. We were here before you. We have more history. We have more culture than you have. Maybe you're bigger than us. And they said, well, you don't even have a city center. And so they all got together, the whole community got together and said, okay, we need a city center, we need arts and crafts, we need performing arts, we need a city hall, we need a library, we need museum. And so we had the opportunity to bring their vision into reality. It was a great opportunity to work with the whole community. They all divided themselves up and the whole community worked together. And they raised the money. They had to even raise their own taxes. So they had to be part of it because it was their money they were paying for, and they had to make sure it really served them. So they chose to raise their taxes, but they also chose to be totally in charge of the project. And we couldn't exceed the budget by 1 penny because it had to do the job. So it was really an amazing project. They chose the site, though, on the river. And under the building is an underground river. Like, how are we going to deal with that? Well, we had to put a whole bunch of piles, like a pincushion down, a whole bunch of piles, and then put a raft, concrete raft, and put the building on that so the building wouldn't float down the river. It's still there, though. So, and then we used this water over the, to help reduce the heating loads inside, which is a sculptural feature at the same time. So it was fun working with the community in that way, but it was all bottoms-up planning, working with the community. And for Peter Lougheed, we did Alberta Opportunities Company to promote, businesses in the province of Alberta. And it's also a courthouse and a treasury branch. But we wanted to make the building to be a fun place for people to come and to be able to have these facilities by government with an atrium and a place where people could enjoy themselves in our long winter months. See, we're not designing, when it gets cold, everybody wants to go south because it's like a desert in the north. We're not really designing for northern conditions. We should have, in the north, a lot of glass. We should use vertical agriculture, like the young people in my office who did a thesis on doing agriculture within our cities, do vertical planting and being able to have plants and some beautiful relationship to nature, to life in the long winter months. Out west, I designed this house for myself that was like a pit greenhouse that was built in the side of a hill. You see, heated by the earth and by the sun. And it was a way to bring in the winter sun like a pit greenhouse so that you could really enjoy. It's bringing the south to the north and enjoy living in that. Space Science Center we did was our 7th building on the computer. I found that the more I did these organic forms, the more complicated it was to build them. And we were totally involved in the XYZ coordinates, because it's like defining the human body, XYZ coordinates to define it, because you can't define it with a ruler. It's not this dimension by this dimension. It's a series of XYZ coordinates. So I dreamed that we could develop our computer technology for the future, because I saw that in the United States they had developed the technology for warfare, where they could have the coordinates of all the cities of the planet on a computer and zoom in the back pocket of a Russian in Red Square and plant an atomic bomb. And I said, I need that technology for building. So I went back to Texas, where anything is possible. See, in Texas, they always have this mentality: if anybody can do it, we can do it. And so they were the only people that would tackle the problem. So they developed the software for me. And then I bought Hewlett Packard computer to drive the software. And so I was totally computerized in the 70s. But that computer, to run my software, it was 512K, half a megabyte. And it cost $250,000. It was the size of a refrigerator. It had to be in an air-conditioned room. And my hard drive was a 120 megabyte disk, was the size of a washing machine. And it cost 60 grand. So we were totally computerized. So this is the 7th building on the computer. See, anything is possible when you put your mind to it. So we did this next. And Space Science Center, where we developed the whole design on the computer, and then built all the component parts in Toronto, shipped them to Alberta, and then put them all together. Computer, we've been totally computerized and since the 70s. I think it's a marvelous tool. The museum was all done on the computer. When we were in Alberta, and I had the staff and this computer, which I had to pay for, then Trudeau put the National Energy Policy out, which wiped out Alberta, the economy of Alberta. So I thought, gee, it was really nice to play architect in Alberta and be a regional architect of the prairies, but I have to have a broader vision or I'll starve. So I declared that we would be a national office. And so what happened, they put out a competition for the National Museum. And we decided that we were going to win the competition, no matter what. So we put all our energies and everything into the competition. And we won the competition over all the other architects in Canada. And so Trudeau selected us to implement his vision. He wanted symbols of nationhood. He had this vision that Canada had to have to enshrine our rights, a document to enshrine our rights, a gallery to enshrine our arts, a museum to enshrine our culture. Those are symbols of nationhood. And that's what he wanted. He had this vision. And his vision was for the museum that was a place where people of all cultures could come there and have their cultures all represented and realize that by sharing another person's point of view, that you can be enriched and broadened by opening your heart to other people's cultures. And he felt that that was very important. And of course, I really believed in that vision, and I had the wonderful opportunity of carrying it out. Indeed, it was a challenge because we started on, I think, about March. I had to give some 80 presentations to some 15 government departments and get their approvals. And so I worked night and day, and by that October, I got all the approvals, including the National Capital Commission, and I was ushered then the next day in the Prime Minister's office, who wanted to see all the models and everything. And so I spent a couple hours with Prime Minister Trudeau, and he wanted to know every aspect of it. So after a couple hours, he says, good, I understand it completely. Now I'll bring in the cabinet and they will approve it. And so he brought in the cabinet. He made a presentation to them. And he said, isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? And they said, yes, Prime Minister. But we don't have any money. He says, I've been thinking this over. He says, you know, we're in this Cold War now, but Russia is going to go down the tube. There's no way that they can sustain themselves. And if I'm going to put all this money into armaments, He said, I'd rather put it in the museum. I'm going to take a frigate from the Minister of Defense's budget, and I'm going to put it on the Ottawa River, and that's going to be the National Museum. And the Minister of Defense said, well, we can't do that. He said, yes, we can. I'm the Prime Minister. And so he said, go out and see the model. So he went out there, and he says, isn't that better than some ship in some far-off sea somewhere doing nothing? He says, isn't it better to do something of culture for the people? And they all agreed. Then he walked out, and he said, well, Doug, you're to start construction tomorrow. So I thought, well, Prime Minister, this is an earthquake zone, and this is on a floodplain, and the program have things in it that haven't even been invented yet, and you don't even own the site. It still belongs to the Bell. He says, how long will it take to straighten all these things out? And I said, if I work night and day, probably 2 years, because, it's really challenging working with your government. And he said, I don't have time to that. You're to start construction tomorrow. I said, yes, Prime Minister. And that's what we had to do. The next day, we put out a hoarding contract and fencing up, and got bulldozers on the site, working like mad, designed all the piles for the foundations, put that out for tender, got that done, the next tender. And what we had to do was, as we drew the building and put it out for tender, 256 separate contracts, as in sequential tendering, that's how we had to do it. By the time Mulrooney came in, we had most of the contracts signed, and it was a fait accompli, So I started realizing that was the only way it could happen. So sometimes you're given these impossible challenges, and you can't deal with logic and reason. Like, it would be like, okay, he wants me to give the most important performance in Carnegie Hall. He's given me a cast of thousands from Montreal, of which, we don't communicate very well together, and they have all the instruments, and I'm supposed to conduct an orchestra and compose it at the same time and create the best music in Carnegie Hall. This does not make any sense. So a lot of times commitment has nothing to do with logic. It has to do with say, I'm going to do it no matter what. And anything worthwhile, that's what makes things happen. Now we have the fun, 25 years later or whatever, of changing it to the Canadian Museum of History. Because at that particular time, we could not tell the real history of the French community in Canada because it was too controversial. And definitely we couldn't talk about the First Nations history. That's even more controversial at that time. This time, we have a new president, and he wants to tell the whole unvarnished history of Canada. Wow, we're having fun with that. So that's a great opportunity. And, my engineers at the time, because we're in an earthquake zone, you can't do this. This is impossible. You can't do that structurally in an earthquake zone. I said, oh, darn it, I'm going to have to get some new engineers. So, no, I think we can do it. Good, let's do it. People, need to be stretched. Everybody is comfortable in where they're at. They don't want to change. When I brought the computers to my office and I sat down, I learned the software and I showed the people, look at this. And I can transfer it to the Calcom plotter that can draw in 30 inches a second. They were terrified because they had to get off and learn something entirely new. And there was claw marks all the way to the 21st century, you know. And they didn't want to change. So I had to throw out, you know, like Cortez did. I had to burn their ships. I threw out all the drawing boards, pencils, and everything and put computer terminals in front of them and said, this is the way we're going now. And there's only one way they had to go. So, and then after a while, you know, they saw it as a great opportunity of learning new tools. So this is some of the things that, you know, we also did the First Nations University in Regina. It was a great opportunity to bring the vision of the First Nations elders into reality. And they wanted the building to be out of the same stone as the museum. And it embraced the South. The migratory life comes from the South. And that was very important. And there we have, in a sense, a glass teepee in the center. And we could have a fire in there and smoke goes out in the four directions. And there's the four colors and everything. We had a Mayan sculptor do the hearth out of pipestone. So it's a more universal building, and it's a great opportunity. This is for 9 cities north of Toronto. One city hall is a challenge. Try 9. But we designed this building to serve the region of York. And all the mayors of 9 cities and councillors sit in a circle. And this is an opportunity of First Nations to rebuild their whole community by developing a casino, which is the most successful casino in upstate New York. They bought all the land back that was stolen from them, from their casino. And we have a Las Vegas showroom in the casino that people really enjoy. And also in Winnipeg, in the place where all the native people gather in the city, we created a Thunderbird House. And in the center of the Thunderbird House, we can have a fire. Now that took a lot of technology, modern technology, to build a fire like right there. And still meet all the code requirements. So it was a challenge to build that, but like, you know, we can go to the moon and back, so why not build a fire in the building, an open fire? At the opening, everybody gathered in there, and everybody, the mayor, everybody was all in a circle, and the elders came in the 4 directions. And they kept building the fire. The flames were leaping up like this, and I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't plan for it that way, but the flames were about this high, and the smoke was going. But then, with all the systems worked, and the smoke went straight up, and everybody took it for granted that they didn't have smoke in their eyes, you know. But it took a lot of effort. So I turned to the engineers, wow, you know, they did a great job. See, we can do all these things. And this was a wonderful opportunity we're working on in Blind River. Perhaps it would happen, where both the First Nations and the community wanted to get together for a museum. And here the people of Ojiboogamoo in northern Quebec, they were abandoned on a lake with nothing, and they asked me to help them build a village for 500 people. And they had this vision for their village, a very powerful vision that served their people. And I had the wonderful opportunity of listening to their vision and then coming back and then drawing it all up and coming back to the people all 500 of them, and saying, okay, this is my interpretation of your village. But you have to understand one thing. I'm this architect from Alberta, you know, with a Blackfoot background and office in Ottawa. What the heck do I know about the James Bay Cree? Unless you criticize this and modify it and evolve it to suit your needs, it'll be another colonial act coming from me. Now, you have the responsibility to tell me how it can be improved. Putting my ego aside, I want you to tear it to shreds. So they said, well, you know, we don't have the education that you have. And I said, well, university doesn't give out brains, you know, nor degrees in common sense. So how about, so then they took them a while, and then they let me have it. And I sat down and wrote everything, criticism. Because people sometimes don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want. And so I had a list of things. New information. I went back and redesigned it, and it came back, presented to them. Ta-da, you know, and then they all gathered. This time they were used to it. And all the children, everybody, the elders, and then okay, that may function for the elders, but, you know, we have to look after the elders and the children. This doesn't quite work here. They went through the same thing. It took about 8 times of real hard work between ourselves. Finally, I went back and presented them. Everybody was there. You know, the kids going over the models, everything. All 500 people there. And so I presented it, and the chief said, okay, put your input. Absolute silence. So he said, come on now. Nothing. So then the chief says, well, Doug, you finally got it. And the people stood up, said, yep, that's our village. And they built it and won a United Nations Award as the Village of the Future, and were featured in Expo 2000. So that's what happens when you listen to people. Right now, these people own their own homes. They have their schools, teach their own language. They are a driving force in that community because they were given the opportunity to express themselves in their own culture. And that's what they need. They have jobs, they have opportunities, and all their kids speak Cree, French, and English. And they're going to post-secondary education more than even the national average. So this can happen to a community. We just finished a cultural center there that we just opened up this spring. And it's going to serve all of James Bay Cree, teaching their language, their history, their culture. And it's a tourist center. They make money in tourism because, see, in Canada, there's no real Indian villages. They're poor white slums that are provided to them by the government as wards of the state. There's no expression of planning and architecture and history and everything. So, you know, the Japanese and people from Germany want to come and visit an Indian village. Where's an Indian village? There ain't any. Well, they come to Ojiboogamoo. So the people have a lot of tourism because they can show what it's like living their culture and their language. So this is an opportunity of many communities in the north. And of course, it is something that in many ways the other communities are not encouraged by the government to follow this plan, because it's not in society's interest to give the people that much freedom, unfortunately. Things are going to change. Things are changing. That's good. We did this project for the people of Grand Traverse in Michigan. They wanted a turtle. Okay? That's a turtle with 13 plates in the back of a turtle. I didn't know this. I'm from the West, so I didn't know turtles. Turtles have 13 plates on their back, which is a symbol of the power of women. It's connected to the lunar months, 13 lunar months. And so there's 13 columns in the main entrance that represent the power of women. We also did the National Museum American Indian design in Washington. We got unanimous approval to proceed to construction, but a lot of politics incurred, and other architects built our design. They tried to claim the design, of course, and it was very difficult to deal with sometimes American politics. But for all the people that claimed the design, you know, when they took the scaffolding off the building, everybody looked at it and said, hey, that's Cardinal's work. And then everybody ran for cover because, I mean, it was like an elephant in the kitchen, because I just have that signature design, and that's my signature. But it's there, and it serves, it's right in front of the Capitol, and it's a great opportunity for Native people to present the best of their culture in their nation's capital, in Washington. And so you can see the models that we made and the images that we made, and it's a wonderful opportunity. Next. As you see it in Washington. We also, I'm working on projects that takes municipal waste, runs it through plasma converters, develops it to its molecular level, scrubs out all the pollutants, leaving a syngas that goes to generators to generate electricity. So from garbage to electricity instead of landfill, to help clean up the planet. We actually have a prototype plant in Ottawa, and we are now at the stage of proceeding to build it in the spring. We're just in the middle of construction documents right now for the whole plant. So this is part of that plant. What is funny is that this client, you know, we're doing a garbage disposal plant, but he wants it beautiful. He wants it to be a piece of architecture. I mean, I think that'll bring a lot of other clients to shame. Hey, you know, this is a garbage disposal plant. He wants architecture. You know, what about our cities? So we're having a lot of fun putting that together. And we're using a space frame that comes from the Basque Country in Spain, because the Romans taught the Basque metallurgy in 2,000 years ago, and they really know what they're doing now. They have a lot of innovation and a lot of creativity there, so we're working with that space frame from Spain. And we developed houses made out of panels, like an IKEA-type house that could all be bolted together instead of an expensive house like we have to build. Why not develop houses like an IKEA-type house? And this is a house that we developed, and this is next. This is the actual house in China, northern China. Next. Next. Now this is the Cree Cultural Center in Ojiboogamoo that we have just finished. and opened this summer. And it's like a traditional house, but looking way to the future. And it's all out of wood, you know, using all the latest wood products. And it's an exciting project for the community. And not only helps bring back their culture and their history, but also their language back. And it serves the whole northern community, and it's very much of a tourist attraction. Next. 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 This is a hospital that we did in Sioux Lookout. Next. Next. This hospital, what we did was take the doctors and nurses, when they're up in Sioux Lookout, that serves 30 communities, found that the traditional ways of healing was even more successful than Western medicine. See, Western medicine is more like the George Bush of medicine. Let's nuke those germs, you know. And there's collateral damage when you do that in Western medicine. Whereas Indian medicine is more natural. And actually, so doctors and nurses there thought, gee, let's combine our Western medicine with the native medicine, because the native medicine they found was even more successful in many ways in healing. So we designed this hospital that has the best of both worlds. So we have, you know, healing areas and areas for lodges and sweat lodges and ceremonies and operating rooms and all that stuff. So we have the best of both worlds in this hospital in Sioux Lookout. It's about a $110 million hospital. It serves some 30 communities the size of Germany. And when the people fly into it and look down, we mark the earth in a traditional way, because the whole hospital is in the shape of a medicine wheel, so they could see that we respect their Ojibwe culture. We worked with the elders to do this. In the center here is where everyone is welcome. The 4 colors, the 4 races, we embrace everyone who comes to the hospital. And it was financed by the federal government, the provincial government, the community. And it serves the community of Sioux Lookout and all around surrounding area, but also the 30 communities. You can see the lodge there. In that lodge, the 30 communities brought earth from each community and mixed it together like we're all one. And they have their ceremonies there. And that's a hall, like in the shape of a canoe in the hall. Next. 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 And these are concepts that we're doing on the computer for using space frame systems. Next. Next. And the classrooms are using cross-laminated timber in the design of educational facilities. Next. And see what our computers can do. Right now, we build everything on the computer, full scale, so everything can be dimensioned. All the systems, mechanical, electrical, structural, everything, we put in 3D. So we can actually see everything in 3D and build it all on the computer. Next. Next. We're also doing an extension for Saudi Arabia's embassy in Ottawa. Next. Just showing how we can walk into the buildings. Next. Next. And also, just a way that when we're planning for First Nations, you see, following their idea that not only do you plan for people, you plan for the life givers. You plan for every living thing, for their future. Because unless they have a future, we have no future. So we have to plan for, like in this case, they asked me to plan their whole community. So they had some 70,000 acres that they finally were left with. And next. So first we planned their whole traditional land use. Their next. And the way they used their land in the future, their hunting areas, their planting areas, they used balsam root for their medicines, for improving their immune system. And all of those plants had to be preserved. Next. Their historical sites had to be preserved. Next. And also the species at risk. To destroy a species is a crime against the Creator. So they had to make certain that these species that were endangered had a proper habitats so that they could have a life for their future, for their grandchildren. So we had a plan for the future of these, the species were at risk. Next. And the range for the other species, like the bear and the round-horned sheep and the and moose, and next. And a potential for really recreational area to teach their children about living in harmony with nature. Next. See, even here, including this and the next slide, next, that even they presented the paths of all these animals. The elders knew how all these animals, the paths of all these animals, we had to respect their lives. Next. So, and of course the waterways we had to respect. Next. And to make sure that the water would be purified before it gets to the river naturally. Next. So this is an example of man and nature working in harmony together. That's planning. What we're doing is not planning. It's destruction. That's planning. You know, and First Nations have been planning that way for thousands of years, and we have so much to learn from them. I mean, I'm amazed at the knowledge that people have. When I go to an isolated northern community, I sit down for hours, the elders, as they tell me how they look after their resources in a good way for the future, and how they've done that for thousands of years. And we need that knowledge. We need that knowledge transferred to our universities. And that's why I feel it's really important this school have that affinity and that relationship with the First Nations elders. Even when they wanted to plan this area here for development in the city of Kamloops, you see, here, the planning here was not all done around the sewage systems. You see, the whole city is planned around the sewage systems, like it's all planned around our assholes. You know, it's not, I mean, we're much, you know, not planned around here, not even planned around our hearts, you know. And so what they said, please don't plan that way. And also, when we're looking at these communities, they're taking all the runoff from the roads and everything and are dumping it into the river and killing all the salmon. That's not planning. So they said, okay, what we're going to do here is take all the runoff from the roofs and everything, and this is the natural draining pattern of the land, and what we'll do is run off all the water and then we'll pond the water and do like a wetlands where you have bulrushes and things that purify the water. So we'll naturally purify the water because the wetlands are the kidneys of the planet. And we'll create wetlands. So by the time the water gets to the river, it'll be purified. And then instead of running the water in pipes to storm sewage, we run it on top of the land because the land is arid. And let's have the water, then create a bunch of plants and trees, and then have that be the core so that we'll have pedestrian next. See, the pedestrian will be the green areas, and the traffic will be the red areas. And so why not separate the vehicular and pedestrian traffic so the kids can take their ponies to school without ever crossing a road? And why not then have it be that the elders can walk and the children can walk without having the problem of interfering with vehicular traffic? Separate the vehicular traffic from the pedestrian traffic. Now, doesn't that make sense? So next, so then zone it in a way that nature flows through, rather than, see, these areas, they captured nature into little pockets. Oh, here's a little park, here's a little park, here's a little, like dividing and conquering nature. So nature can't flow. So next. And then we create it all out of cul-de-sacs, you see. And doing it this way, we could separate the vehicular and pedestrian traffic. So then we thought that we were doing really good in the community, and the women were watching us, and they said, okay, you guys did pretty good, but it still does not serve us as women and mothers of children. What we want, it's still a reflection, they said, of this patriarchal culture. What you've done is you want to control all the women. So you separate all the women from each other so the guys can control them. And then what happens when you separate the women from each other, the children are separated from each other. Children are social beings. They need other children to play with and to enjoy. And by separating the women from each other, the children are separated also, and they're driving us crazy in our houses because people want to get together. So they said, okay, we want you to plan it this way. Next. You see, put the children in the center, put the women around the circle, put the traffic around that. And the single mother said, gee, I would like to be part of that circle. I could get help from other women. The elder said, I want to be part of those circles because I could transfer the language and culture to the children. So he said, we want the whole community divided up into clusters like this. Now, are we wrong? Is there other societies that have something like that? I said, yeah, old London is like that. Instead of circles, it's all squares, but it's the same thing. And Philadelphia is like that, old Philadelphia, when they were designing, for people instead of cars. And and so they wanted to plan their whole community in that way. So this is, this is the way people were thinking. Now, we're doing also Indigenous Center. It was a legacy of the president of the University of Saskatoon that in the heart and center of his campus and the soul of the campus should be a First Nations building that was able to take the knowledge of the cult of the elders and share it with the whole university. And so we wanted the building to be really rooted in the earth, but be a sculpture that's open open to the south, which is like the traditional lodges. and to be out of stone as a sculptural building, and have the ceremonies and teachings, which would be open to all the students on the main tunnel system, so that you can come up into the building and enjoy the activities there. Next. Next. So you see, we build it all on the computer, every part of it. Next. 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 You see, every piece of glass, every gusset on the windows, every piece of aluminum, every bit of flashing, we can build it all on the computer now. Isn't that marvelous what we can do on the computer? And we have all the young folks in our office, because I decided, okay, I had my office and everybody wanted job security and all that sort of stuff. So, and they were impeding me from doing what I want to do. So I said, okay, go out, do your thing. And I went, then decided to start all over again, recreate myself. So I hired a bunch of young people who knew all the computers from age 2 on. They can find an apps for anything. And we all are now having a lot of fun. And we're doing buildings where we totally build them on the computer, and then we can go to manufacturing of every part and every component. And this shows what we can do with the latest computer technology. We're using Revit, but also we're using Rhino, because Revit can't deal with our complex curves, so we have to go to Rhino, and then we transfer it to Revit. And so we're having a lot of fun. But we can walk through our buildings, we can see what they look like before we build them. We can make all the mistakes on the computer rather than on the job. We can see how everything comes together, every nut and bolt of it. We can put it together. And we're all having a great deal of fun. So this is the technology, and that is the future. So, thank you. Thank you very much.